Hey everyone, Mr. Murphy here. I'm going to be talking about mitosis and then introducing the concept of meiosis, which is just a different way in which the body makes cells. So both of these processes, mitosis and meiosis, are all about making cells, and we'd seen mitosis previously. Mitosis is the way in which the body takes one cell and produces two identical copies. And it's important to remember these are identical. So you would not be able to tell when that one cell splits into two, you wouldn't be able to tell any real difference between the two, as the entire purpose of it is that it makes copies of cells you already have. We call those somatic cells, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but somatic cells are basically just normal body cells. All throughout your body, normal cells. So they're identical, and the main purpose for that is, two purposes: growing, and to replace anything that's lost or damaged. You skin your knee, you're riding your bike and like get a scrape or something, and that's cells that are gone, and it's the nearby cells that replicate and regrow and restore that, and then you're hopefully healed. So that's mitosis. That's normal cell growth in the body. Meiosis, on the other hand, is for a single type of cells only, and that is sex cells. And this might sound a little bit like a health class lesson, but don't worry, we'll keep it bio. But of course, health class is bio. In this case, we take one cell and we end up making 4 cells, but those cells are unique cells. So instead of taking one cell and splitting it into 2 and getting 2 identical, we've very intentionally taken one and we created 4 unique cells. And these type of cells have important differences from a normal cell, and these type of cells are called gametes, which is a word that just refers to things like sperm and egg cells. So there's some important terms. The first one, somatic cells. Somatic cells are our regular body cells. These are our completely normal cells, and includes things like a neuron and a blood cell and whatever these are, just normal cells inside of an organism. The second type is sex cells, and like I said, that's specifically sperm and egg cells. And then when you get into plants, it might seem a little weird, but when you talk about plants and pollen is a way of delivering a sperm cell. So it's related to the sexual reproduction that occurs inside of flowering plants as well. So the first thing to talk about are chromosomes. And to make replication easier, when our cells are going to divide right before mitosis, we make a copy of our DNA. And we do that by packaging that DNA up into these tightly wound coils called chromosomes. And we often talk about chromosomes like outside of biology class. You hear the word chromosomes get referenced. And that's good. That's the way we talk about our DNA, and how humans have 46 chromosomes. We got 23 from mom, 23 from dad, which is like the whole 23andMe thing, if you've heard of that company. And so that's all good. But chromosomes actually only exist during replication. Normally, the DNA is all spread out in this material called chromatin, which is basically just, it's little pockets of coiling up and stuff, but basically the DNA is sort of loose. And that's because the DNA has the instructions on how the cell should operate and how the cell should produce proteins, and so we kind of need it unpacked. But it's important to know that we pack it up during this process of replication. And the reason for that is it's going to help us to move these things around and make sure that when we make 2 cells, they both get equal copies, equal sets, rather, of all of the chromosomes. Because if you ended up with having one cell and it splits into 2 cells, but they have weird numbers of chromosomes, that causes huge problems, and those cells probably won't make it, or at least won't be effective. So eukaryotic organisms, we get 2 copies of every chromosome. We have 2 copies of all of our chromosomes. That's what I was saying. 23 from your mom, 23 from your dad. Different animals, different plants, different fungi, bacteria, everything's got chromosomes, but different numbers of them, just depending upon what types of genes and what kind of genetics you have. This is a picture of a human karyotype, which is just basically the full view of the human chromosomes. And let me move myself out of this. Here we go. And on the left-hand side, you can see males. On the right-hand side, you see females. It's totally identical. Okay, so don't worry about the orientation of these. They're totally identical, except where it shows number 23. So for our final chromosome is the one that determines whether you are male or female. And here on the left half of this, you can see chromosome 23 has an X and a Y chromosome. That's what defines males as males. And then an X and an X chromosome, which is for females. So that's actually determined when your parents they loved each other very, very much. No, we're not going to do the health class thing. But when the sperm and egg cell that would become you came together, the egg cell definitely had an X. And the reason for that is because mom only has 2 X chromosomes. So she could pass you one or she could pass you the other, but it's guaranteed she passes you an X chromosome. Dad, on the other hand, has an X and a Y. So it's a 50-50 shot, and it's determined by the sperm and which chromosome it carries, whether that's an X or a Y. And so if 2 X's, an X from the egg and an X from the sperm, then you will be female. And if it's an X from the egg and a Y from the sperm, then you would be male. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about chromosomes. A normal cell has 2 sets. Normal somatic cells have two sets of chromosomes. That word here that's in bold is diploid, which refers to the fact that they have 2 sets, diploidy, ploidy referring to the unique sets of DNA inside of your cell. So you have 2 unique sets of DNA, one that you got from your mom, one that you got from your dad. Sex cells, however, have only 1 set. They are haploid. Okay, so a sex cell, like an egg or sperm, only has 1 set. So let's think about this, because we're smart people. Why would an egg and a sperm cell only have 1 set when all of the other cells inside of a person's body have 2 sets of chromosomes? Well, hopefully we're thinking about this. If the egg has 1 set and the sperm has 1 set, then when the 2 combine and when the 2 then become the new organism, they'll have 2 sets, right? One from the mom side, one from the dad side, and now it makes this new genetically unique individual. So the process of meiosis is all about how we make cells that only have 1 set of DNA. Because again, all of the other cells in your body that have a nucleus have 2 complete sets of DNA. So it's a very unique process that we need to be able to, for the purpose of reproduction, need to be able to produce these cells that only have 1 set. So here we can see haploid versus diploid, that same kind of karyotype. And you could imagine this one on the right here of the haploid cells, you could imagine doubling that, and it would look something like the diploid one, right? Because you just have 2 complete sets of all of these. So that's what happens when egg and sperm combine. So we already covered how somatic cells grow, and that's mitosis. So in the process of mitosis, before mitosis actually, you have interphase, which is just like normal cell living and growing and stuff. And then when the signal comes, and signals can come in many different ways, some of them are related to like hormones in puberty, others are related to like, a chunk of your hand goes missing and the neighboring cells then are signaled by the absence of their neighbor, so that triggers them to start growing, to repair it. So there's a lot of different types of signals that can occur, but when that signal happens, the thing that needs to occur before the cell can actually split is right away you need to make a new set of DNA. Because you're going to take 1 cell and split it into 2 cells. You don't want to just cut the DNA in half and now you have 2 cells with weird amounts of DNA. So you have to double the amount of DNA. That happens during interphase. Mitosis, we learned about, is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And during that, the chromosomes line up. They get in the middle. They get pulled apart. You end up with 2 nuclei. And then you have cytokinesis, which I like to think of as like a big karate chop that just finally splits the cell into 2, and that's how you take 1 cell and create 2 identical cells. So mitosis starts with a diploid cell and it ends with 2 identical diploid cells to the one that you started with. Here it is, mitosis. Okay, so that process, again, you start with 1 cell. Okay, here it is. Look at the cell on the left. We're getting ready to undergo mitosis, so we replicate our DNA, and now we have twice as much DNA as we normally do. and then we undergo mitosis where it all sort of gets split up. And then in the end, if you look at the right-hand side versus the left-hand side, you'll see that you ended up with two cells that were exactly identical to what we started with. All right, and that's the whole point of mitosis. For, let me just keep myself out of here. For sex cell creation, that's meiosis. And you'll notice this looks a little more intense. We got just like more steps going on. But really, if you look at the picture, it shows you how we take one cell and we split it to two. And then we take both of those cells and we split each of them twice, or sorry, an additional time. And now you have 4 cells. So you go from 1 to 2 to 4. And that's just because during meiosis, there's actually 2 divisions that occur. And the naming of these things are pretty handy and pretty simple. So we start with interphase, normal cell stuff, growth, right before, that should say meiosis, sorry. Right before meiosis, we get a new copy of the DNA that gets made, and then we go into meiosis. And during meiosis, we first have meiosis 1, where we split the nucleus. And we go through prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1. At the end of that, if you look at the colors of the chromosomes in this picture, it shows you how they're different. At the end of that, you've already made 2 unique cells. So the way in which the DNA separates during meiosis is a little different than mitosis, and that's to create this uniqueness. And then what happens when it splits again, we don't have another interphase in here. So we don't double the chromosomes again. So since we don't do that, then when we split it, instead of having 2 copies of each chromosome, now the 4 resulting cells only have 1 copy of each chromosome. And that's why, or that's how meiosis is able to start with a cell that has that's diploid and end up with 4 cells that are haploid, that have half as much DNA. They only have 1 set, whereas a normal cell has 2 complete sets. And these 4 cells right here would go on to further develop into either an egg cell or sperm cells, based upon whether you're male or female and, what's going to happen to them. So here's meiosis 1 and 2 kind of combined. We start with just a normal cell. It's diploid. We have interphase occur and we double the chromosomes, and then we split them. And then we split them again. And you'll also notice some exchange of like the red and the blue here. So there's some unique components to meiosis that really mix them up genetically. Because remember, the whole point of meiosis is that we are creating these unique cells that are going to go on to be a pretty important part of the process of reproduction, which in the process of reproduction, diversity and variation in things are actually very, very helpful to an organism or to a population in order to survive. So the way in which meiosis works is it serves to really scramble up the chromosomes that you have so that what you would go to pass on to your child in the future would actually be like a very much mixed up version of what you have. So it's not just like you passed on all of your chromosomes and your spouse passes on all of their chromosomes and then your kid is just this 50-50 mix of you and your spouse. I mean, they sort of are because they get 50% of their DNA from you and 50% from the other parent, but really they're kind of a unique mix of the chromosomes that you got from your parents. And so as generations continue, individuals really become these very, very unique mixes of the several generations that came before them. And all of that's about increasing diversity, and which if we had the opportunity to go a little more into evolution and things, we see why more diversity is good. More variation helps a population to survive. So, wrapping this up. Coming back to where we started, mitosis is all about producing normal body cells, somatic cells. It's how you take one diploid cell and produce 2 identical copies. And we do that for growing, we do that for repairing. That's just how our body makes new normal cells. The process of meiosis is very specifically limited to producing egg and sperm cells. It's all about getting ready for the process of reproduction. Meiosis is not reproduction. Reproduction, health class, is when the egg and sperm cell would then find a way to come together. But meiosis is all about producing those sex cells. It takes one diploid cell and has 2 divisions that lead to 4 total unique cells, and those cells then would go on to become sperm or egg cells. All right, so there is your quick run through mitosis and how it relates to this process of meiosis. Thanks.